Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 13 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. Now, um, first of all, let's go over the copyright information, which should be on your screen right now. This says that this is copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander, all rights reserved. It says that the interior illustrations are by Todd Lockwood. Maps are by Rhys Davis and designed by Greg Collins. So, yeah. Anyways, in the last book, the last chapter, last part, I'm trying to remember what happened in the last part because it's been a week since I recorded this. Lady Trent, we'll call her Lady Trent. She isn't currently Lady Trent, but she's Isabella Camhurst. But anyways, they went on an expedition to find a rockworm. And they found one and they killed it. Now they are starting to dissect it so that Mrs. Camhurst can do the drawings. So we are going to go over that. Pick up where we left off. Sorry, my phone is going crazy here. Sorry about that. So we're going to go back to this. So this is going to be on the screen. Okay. We're going to start with the, My job, of course, was to draw. I had given a great deal of thought to how I wished to approach this task, and so did not hesitate before giving orders. Jacob, darling, could you spread out one wing? The right one will do. Very nicely, yes. Across the stone there. Rescue may begin the task of skinning the other one for the muscular and skeletal drawings. I expect that will take him a little while. Best we do the more delicate parts before proceeding to the main body. The exposed location was good for other purposes. It would receive sunlight for almost the entire day. We posted Ilgish to keep watch for dragons and set to work. I laid out my drawing board, charcoal, ink, and pens, and clipped a sheet of paper into place. I half expected my hands to tremble. I was standing scarcely 1 foot from a dragon, albeit a dead one, and the time had come for me to justify my presence with the expedition. Surely that was enough to make any young woman nervous. So I was, but my hands knew their business and carried out without concerning themselves over the state of my brain. The first priority, of course, was a rapid sketch of the carcass, providing suggestions of the surrounding terrain including Jacob for scale, as he crouched to take casts of the dragon's teeth. Although the drawings of details would be more useful to science, it was just as vital to depict the whole. Most dragon illustrations at the time still held deplorable inaccuracies, showing the beasts with human-like shoulder joints, or bodies far too thick, or wings far too small. My first sketch would be the frame into which we would fit later details, but I could not take too long at it, and so once I had the most necessary lines, I bent to the task of drawing the wing. The structure was remarkable. The uninformed often say that dragons have bat-like wings, which is a gross oversimplification. It is true that the appearance of the dragon's wing, and here I speak of the most common terrestrial species, is more akin to that of a bat than a bird, but with a membrane stretched between elongated phalanges. But it is more accurate to say that the 4 major types of wings extant in the animal kingdom: bird-like, bat-like, insect-like, and dragon-like. The spacing of the phalangeal joints makes the 4th type entirely distinct. But all of that thought came later, once I was in more scientific frame of mind. The that particular day, two things distracted me as I worked. The first, of course, was the periodic spurts of giddy joy. I was drawing a dragon wing. All my girlhood obsession had come to fruition in most spectacular fashion. The second was less pleasant. Rescue, the dutiful Reliscue, had dutifully gone to work skinning the beast's other wing, adding to the bloodshed by the hunt. The odor rapidly grew from noticeable to appalling. It occurred to me to wonder whether airborne predators posed the greatest danger after all. Any number of creatures in these mountains would be drawn to the smell of fresh meat. Then again, most were leery of humans, and none were currently on a rampage against us. But the stench was very distracting, even for one as little squeamish as I. There was no avoiding it, though. A tiger may be killed and preserved by a taxidermist, or defleshed and its skeleton studied at leisure. Not so with a dragon. They did not fall to ashes, to ash or spark. Oh, they did not fall to ash as sparklings did. But it was well known at the time that dragon bones rapidly became frangible post mortem, defying even the most careful padding, keeping keep them intact. Padding to keep them intact. Even one day after death, simply picking up a bone in your hand could be enough to crack it, and the degeneration grew worse with time. This, of course, was one of the primary reasons we had so few accurate sketches. Such work was such work must be done in the field and rapidly before the decay progressed too far. Reliscue had not yet finished skinning the other wing when I finished drawing my own. I took a moment to lift the limb and study the underside. Despite common sense, I expected it to be heavy. A rockworm's wingspan is often comparable to its length, and my brain was convinced anything so large must be correspondingly weighty. But of course, a heavy wing would not permit flight. The humerus, radius, and ulna are hollow, and the phalanges consist of rough, lightweight cartilage. The membrane of the wing itself was shockingly thin, to the point where I expected it to tear in my hand, but it stretched over my fingers without rupturing a smoothly pebbled surface. At least it felt pebbled. Then I drew my finger from the bones toward the wing edge. As I slid my hand back in the other direction, though intending to lift the wing higher, the membranes rasped at my skin like a cat's tongue. Lord Hilford, I said to the Earl, who was taking a cast of a nearby taloned foot, have you noticed this before? He came up and ran his hand over the wing's underside. The roughness was only palpable there. The top surface felt quite smooth, if a little porous. He exclaimed, bracing the wing higher so he could get a better look. Indeed, I have not, mind you. I've only ever been within touching distance of my little runt. Never a fully grown rockworm. Is this a skin condition the beast is suffering, or a common feature my runt lacked? I wonder. The Earl retrieved a piece of hide from Reliscue's work and slid his palm across it. Same thing here. Tom, bring me the magnifying glass, he exclaimed he examined it beneath the lens. It's clearly textured in some fashion, but I can't make out enough at this magnification. We'll have to try it under the microscope back at the house. Condemnation. Your pardon, Miss Camhurst. I knew I should have brought brandy. The skin and flesh don't degenerate in the same way as the bones, but they do decay. We'll cut a good sample, and then we'll hope the chill works in our favor for once. His mention of decay recalled me to my purpose, and its urgency, I drew the body, sprawled inelegantly across the stone. And then the opposite wing was ready for me, stench and all. Dragon blood, truly a pungent thing. I recommend avoiding it if possible. I ended up sacrificing dignity for comfort, cutting 2 pieces from my handkerchief and stuffing them up my nostrils for relief. Thus protected, I sketched the muscular and skeletal structure of the wing. Then the true butchery began. Mr. Wilker, whose veterinary knowledge surpassed my own, was determined to dig for whatever organs gave rise to the rockworm's extraordinary breath. This necessitated turning the carcass onto its back and thus gutting it. I caught a glimpse of the wishbone and did not try to suppress my smile. I had not yet drawn the feet or anything like sufficient detail, but since we had casts of those, it was decided that I should first devote my time to the skull. Mr. Wilker, in an oddly chosen attempt to protect my feminine sensibilities, had Relescu hack off the necessary bit and carry it a little distance away from the rest of the body. We are undoubtedly stranger. Oh, there are undoubtedly stranger experiences in life than sitting cross-legged on an outcropping of stone with a severed dragon's head facing you, like the skull of Gortos himself. Indeed, I had had my share over the years, but I must say that this one ranks fairly high, especially when one begins conversing with the head. This is most undignified for you, I confided to the staring eyes, their green filming over with gray already. My apologies. You were on your way to find breakfast, and instead you found us. I don't suppose it would comfort you to know how much we are learning. No, I imagine not. The jaws remained silent and shut. A good thing, too, or I would have fallen to my death from the stone in shock. Why are you attacking people? I mused, turning the head so I could draw the profile. Reliscu had hopefully cut through the spine, several vertebrae down from the skull, leaving the ruff undamaged like a proud fan of stony plates. I was surprised to find them stiffly flexible to the touch. Of course, you may have not harmed anyone, but what about your kin? Not that you could have told us if you knew. Do you communicate with one another at all beyond mating and territorial disputes? Do rockworms have some way of signaling that there is a fat, unguarded flock of sheep the next valley over? What are you doing? Jacob asked from behind me. My pencil skidded across the paper as I squawked and nearly toppled over. My apologies, he said, all contrition. But then, were you talking to the skull? No, I said, and then perhaps, which, as responses go, is not very good for covering up the truth. Jacob shook his head, but forbore to comment further. Is there something you need? Only to ask how long you think it will be before you're done with the skull. Lord Hilford wants to try defleshing it before the bones become too brittle. The customary method of defleshing, of course, involves boiling or leaving the material in a container with a large number of hungry insects. Neither is suitable for dragon bones. We would have to rely on knives. I'll be done presently, I said, and bent once more to my work, this time without talking. We worked until the light began to fail, leaving ourselves just enough time to return to our camp before it became too dark. With the exception of our Vestrani lads, none of us wanted to go. We knew very well that during the night, scavengers would be at the carcass and the bones would continue their inevitable decay, but the location was far too exposed to be safe. As soon as dawn came, we clambered back up to our carcass only to find it gone. We stood in a ragged line, staring comically at the empty expanse of stone. Blood yet stained the ground, and shreds of offal swarming with ants, but the body itself nothing. Faintly I said, "Bears? Or wolves," Jacob added, as if wolves are capable of carrying off anything a tenth so large. Even for bears it was too much. Lord Hilford stirred himself and began to quarter the area, examining the ground. He had been a great hunter in his youth. I knew for the first time I could see it in him. "I don't think so," he said. "See here, scratches in the stone. But they cut through the blood. These were made last night." Mr. Wilker had joined him and was frowning over the scene. "It looks like they tore the carcass to pieces before carrying it off. A fight, I suppose. Dragons. Do they eat carrion?" I asked, stammering slightly. "Their own kind?" "As to the first, I imagine so," Lord Hilford said. "We may idolize predators as noble hunters, but the truth is that very few of them will turn their nose up at a meal that can't run away. As to the latter, it does happen among animal kind. I have known lions to do it. My readers may recall that I am the woman who, at the tender age of 7, dismembered a dove with my brother's penknife. I am not squeamish, but I also confess that the notion of dragons committing cannibal acts, tearing apart the body of their fallen brother, then carrying the pieces off to eat, made me sufficiently ill that I pivoted and went rapidly down the slope, stumbling and nearly falling as I went. I did not in the end vomit into a bush, but I am glad I removed myself from the immediate vicinity of the smell, or my fortitude might have failed. Jacob came and stood at my side. His expression was much like the one I'd seen the day our Chiaveran drivers went on to the Boyer's house. He was regretting having brought me along. It was to banish that look from his face that I mustered my best smile and said, "Well, I don't imagine the carcass could have been useful for much further study anyways, and now we have learned something new." I watched him very nearly say 3 or 4 things, discarding them all, before he settled on answering me in kind with scholarly detachment. He had not forgotten our conversation before the hunt. It may well be related to the other attacks. It may well be related to the attacks. That there are many legends telling of people sent mad by eating human flesh. The same might well be true of dragons. If so, it answers one question and raises another. Why had dragons begun eating their own kind? For they must not do so habitually. If not, what Dagmira had said was correct. It was not a question we could answer that day, as at Jacob's suggestion, I went back down to the camp and began packing things up. There was nothing more for me to draw at the kill site. The gentleman investigated the now abandoned lair, collected droppings and other materials for later study, and so on. And so much chastened the return to Drustanov. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. The Feast of the Reception. New Vistrani words. Draconian architecture and inscriptions. Something unexpected in the grass. Something even more unexpected below ground. Okay, so let's get started. The village, of course, did not cease to its usual activities simply because there were skirling visitors present. The calendar followed its usual course, and not long after our dragon hunt, the feast of the reception came around. I have not discussed religious matters yet, not in this book, and my earlier publication is, again, not to be relied upon for this matter. please do me the kindness of ignoring all references to religion in that work. Astoria, of course, was and is a land of devout temple worshippers. All of our skirling party was proper followers of the magisterial path, which made us very much the old men and women out in Drusenev. But we had, but we held a belief. We held a brief conference 2 nights before the feast and agreed that although were loath to we were loath to interrupt the pace of our work, which had most recently produced evidence of a difference in male and female rockworm anatomy, for the sake of harmony, we should at least make a nod to the local practice. We did not enter the tabernacle and participate in their ceremony, but we stayed awake through the night, a harder job in the temple calendar, I must say. They celebrate the feast a good fortnight earlier than we do in late Florus instead of early Gramines. Reading our scriptures and then joining them outside the next morning for a celebration. There would be no pleasant stroll through the surrounding countryside for flowers. Snow had fallen during the night, though fortunately not very much of it, but the villagers set up trestle tables in what passed for the center of Drustenev, and there was singing and dancing and everyone dressed in their finest. For that morning, the Strani looked more like it does in the stories. Yokes of colorful embroidery stretched across snowy white shirts, men playing lively tunes on their violins, and so on. In keeping with the generosity of the season, we skirlings gave out small trinkets from among our belongings, such as we could spare, and received pipes and beads and a fine wool shawl in return. This latter I wore draped over my arm as I attempted to learn the local dances, which everyone else seemed to execute without the slightest trouble. Even when so drunk they could scarcely stand. I wondered if some of the smugglers' brandy finished its journey in Drustenev, or rather in the bellies of its inhabitants. One young fellow asked me in comically simplified Vestrani whether I had seen much of the surrounding countryside, and upon hearing I had not, brightened like the dawning sun. No, you must go to the... And then he said a word I did not know. When I shook my head, he said, "Building, go down." He gestured with his hand, something toppling with a crash at the end. Something very old, very old. "Ruins," I said in skirling, and then all at once remembered the blocky shape I had seen during our hunt. Draconian ruins are rare in Skirland, or rather, the ones that exist are none too impressive. I had seen one as a girl shortly before the beginning of my gray years, but it took a scholar to recognize it for what it was. The remains had none of the distinctive art that gave the ancient civilization its name. I did not mind the illustrations I had seen in books were enough to show me that fantastical dragon-headed gods were much less interesting than actual dragons. But my recent taste of freedom had given me a hunger for more. I had much rather visit Draconian ruins than sit cooped up in Gretelkin's dark house, failing to have conversations with the incomprehensible Dagmira. A blind man might have missed my sudden excitement. My interlocutor did not. "I show you, I take you." Then he gave up and kept his sentences simple enough for my poor ear, and let spill a flood of words from which I gathered that he could be more than happy to guide me there and back at my earliest convenience, tomorrow if I liked. I extracted the young man's name from him, Astamir, and the location of his house, a shabby place he occupied with his ailing mother. Though he had said nothing about payment yet, I suspected that was his eventual goal. Well, so be it. By the standards of Drusenev, we were absurdly wealthy and could afford to share a bit of it with this energetic young man. Not tomorrow, though, I said, laughing, when he tried to urge me onward. A few days. We will go soon enough. Whether the others would be interested or not, I could not say. Draconian ruins had very little to do with actual dragons, and our reason for being here. But there was only so much paper filing I could do. I was determined to go, even if I had to go alone. For a time, it seemed I might be going alone. It's hardly worth our time, Mr. Wilker said. We aren't archaeologists, and I hardly think anything in the ruins would shed light on why the dragons are attacking people, which is, you might have forgotten, a rather more pressing question. It leaves little time for sightseeing. I have a great deal of time permitted to spend when I'm permitted to spend on very little other than sightseeing, I replied sweetly. Perhaps if you could arrange to produce more in the way of useful observations, I would have more work to do here. That sounds cattish, as it was. Our research was at last making something like progress, and a good deal of it was owing to Mr. Wilker's efforts. Indeed, it was one of the things about him that annoyed me, for I would gladly have taken on some of his labors, if he would only let me, but he was jealous of anything that might diminish his usefulness in Lord Hilford's eyes. I might have said as much too, embarrassing all parties in the process, myself included. But Jacob intervened. Wilker and I cannot both go to the ruins and do useful work. Isabella, and we must gather data if we are to have any hope of stopping those attacks. Too many of the lairs we've visited so far have been abandoned. We need to find occupied ones so we may examine the evidence of their eating habits. If they're eating their own kind, of course, the bones won't be there, but a lack of bones from other animals would tell us something. Since we could hardly take the pulse and examine the tongues of the local worms, I have to concede that makes sense. But why can't I be spared? It will hardly end the world if your notes remain unfiled for a day or two. Wow. Okay, we have to stop this here. We have been reading from A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring that bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me anyway, or join the Discord server, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.